Congressman Gohmert, great to talk to you.
Always good to talk to you. Thank you.
After your committee's hearing last week and then yesterday's hearing in the Senate, are you convinced at this point that contempt vote is the only way to go?
Well, it's only a start. The contempt vote in committee and then the contempt vote in the House. And then we need a U.S. attorney that will pursue this. Because keep in mind, this isn't just the first problem. I mean, this goes back to an attorney general who wanted to prosecute our own agents who were trying to protect America, and he could not legally define what torture was. That indicated to me he didn't have a good education. I don't care where he went to school. And then after that, things like somebody that stands at polling places with a billy club, and this guy says, no, they're not a problem for voters. I mean, the guy needed to go to begin with. And then to have him intentionally cover up what's been going on and intentionally misrepresent the truth and then fail to provide documents that he knows he has is just outrageous. If these people knew in advance, there's a need for a whole lot more than just a contempt charge. If they'll pursue all this time and money going after Roger Clements, for heaven's sake, how about the people that are supposed to protect us and instead are refusing to do so?
Congressman, let me ask you this, because now Holder is out, saying, hey, he's willing to sit down with the Speaker and Chairman Issa to try to work out a compromise, he says, on some of these records. What do you say to that? You think it's a little bit too late for a compromise? I mean, after he claims this is all about avoiding a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, well, it would be a constitutional crisis for him to go to jail for a year. I can understand his concern, but that is the potential penalty for contempt. But the documents were properly requested, and then over a year, and he still doesn't produce them, and he's still dragging his feet. The compromise should be, okay, you submit all of the documents that have been properly requested, and then you don't go to jail. How's that for a compromise?
And, Congressman, you didn't hold anything back when you questioned Holder last week, asking him what I think a lot of people want to know and find hard to believe. You said, did you not ever go back to your office and say, I demand to know who authorized Fast and Furious? His response, well, let me tell you what I did do. Your reaction to all that.
Yeah, I went and asked the Inspector General to do this. Can you imagine anyone who found out, you or me, we find out for the first time that something the people that work for us were involved in caused the death of one of my agents? Man, we're having a meeting, and there's going to be hell to pay. Somebody is going to account for what happened. And if you have to call one person in after another until one of them says, I need to take the Fifth Amendment, and then you know who it is, you do it. You cannot operate a shop where you have rogue people, maybe directly under, maybe they did involve him, and his memory is as bad when he's over in the Justice Building as it is when he's before our committee. But good grief, he just seems so cavalier. Well, I asked the Inspector General to take a look at it. That is infuriating. I mean, it's just outrageous. A man charged with justice, and that's the response. But then when you hear his response, I believe it's Randy Forbes saying there are political aspects to justice, then you know this is a man that does not understand what our founders did, and they're wanting a justice system where justice was blind, where there were no political aspects, where people were sentenced, people were tried without regard to who they are or what they are, not this Attorney General. And that's why he not only needs to go, he needs to answer for what's happened under his watch.
Well, I know when you asked him that question, he came back right away. I know you didn't like this. He says, let me tell you what I did do. He says, I put an end to the gun walking, and I did more than the Bush administration did with wide receiver. And you try to interrupt him and say, hey, you know what, you can't compare the two, because you really can't.
You really can't. Wide receiver was set up to be a monitored, a closed transfer. And as a former judge, as a former prosecutor, you do those things where you're going to have a transfer, often of drugs or some illegal activity, and you set it up to monitor, and then you move in and seize the folks involved before they get away. Well, now in the Bush administration, wide receiver was intended to be done that way, but during the monitoring, the bad guys got wind and they took off, and so that's a whole lot different than a situation where you intentionally set it up, where you're not going to monitor what happens to the transfer, you're not going to follow what happens, you're just going to give these guns to criminals, and you know the outcome.
We have a dead Border Patrol agent, yep.
Yep, and it's not all over. The results are not all in. There are other people who may be killed because of the incompetence, or it may be purely intentional. There may be mens rea involved in transferring these guns. I know there are a lot of people that think that this was purely an effort to create an excuse to cause more gun control legislation. And we've seen emails that indicate some of them, even after it was found out to be the horrible tactic that it is, there were still people suggesting, well, still, maybe we can use this to demand more gun control.
And you looked right at Holder and you said, let me tell you where I'm coming from. I'm a prosecutor. I'm a district judge. You talked about your personal experiences, and then you looked right at him and he said, your job is justice. But do you think the Attorney General got what you were trying to tell him?
I don't think he did, because if he had, then his response to his effort to find out why and how and who was involved in Fast and Furious would not have been, hey, I asked the Inspector General to take a look. That would not be the response. The response would be that this was so outrageous, justice required, true justice required, that I clean house in my Justice Department, and we not have people that make these kind of decisions to get involved in illegal activity that results in the death of American agents.
Congressman, even if Holder is held in contempt, and I know that Senator Cornyn has now joined, calling for him to resign, but even if he's held in contempt by the House, what is this going to mean? I mean, he's still going to be in his job, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Unless he actually is found guilty through a judicial proceeding and sentenced up to a year in jail. He can't do his job while he's in jail, obviously. But let me tell you, to me, this is not a partisan issue. This is a justice issue. I am shocked that there are not more on the other side of the aisle who will stand up and say, they're right. It's got to go.
Mm-hmm. You think you're going to see that in the next couple of weeks as you move forward?
I would be hopeful that we would, because I know there are some people who care about justice on the other side of the aisle. So the only question is, will they care more about justice than they do a party label?
All righty. Well, we'll see what happens next Wednesday, and thanks for taking the time. And we'll talk to you. We'll talk to you after the vote and see what happens.
Well, thanks for spreading truth across America. There's a real need for it.